Xing. We're just a few days past the first uh, pod, podcast, or what we covered. With so much stuff has happened since then. We're back for another round. So
Yeah, 4
welcome.
days, probably like 4 million breakthroughs or something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, like, so where we left off was, after GPT-4 got released, and the very next
Yep.
day, we caught up here in the studio talking about all the applications, and then Microsoft just announced straight after we had the pod that they're going to be rolling it out across all their Office 365 suite. So this is going to be called Business Chat. So across
Wow.
Teams, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. We knew they were going to do it, but we didn't know they were going to do it this fast. So,
I mean, this is like capitalism talking, right? Yeah,
yeah,
no one wants to lose. That's the thing. No one wants to lose.
that's right.
So this is just where, like, I don't want to say they're throwing caution to the wind, but
Hmm.
it's like, if it's under the guise of, if we don't do it,
Mm.
they're gonna do it.
Yeah,
And that was the big problem with the nuclear
arms
era, with the
race.
atomic
Yeah,
race.
yeah.
If we don't test the bomb, they will test the bomb. And the bomb got tested,
mm,
even if there was speculation that the chain reaction will keep going and blow up
mm.
the whole planet. We tested it anyway.
Yeah, and they got rid of the AI ethics people, right? And it's like, hey, you're telling us this might blow up. Okay, that's all right. Well, what alarm? Just turn it off. But Google did put on a red alert on this, right? So they,
Yeah.
on the same day, we were saying, might not be the best marketing strategy, but they announced, Google Bard equivalent for their market for their workplace.
So it's definitely, this is now a race to the bottom.
Yeah, and to every sense of the word. I mean, in terms of availability, in
Mm.
terms of lack of ethics, right? But also in terms of the cost. So you just saw, just yesterday, I think. So Stanford using Facebook, the Llama model, right?
Yes.
We said that
Llama.
got basically put on 4chan as a torrent. Now everyone has it, including the weights.
Yes, the weights got
The
leaked.
weights got leaked, and so the 7 billion parameter model, the lowest
Mm.
one, was used by Stanford to
Yeah.
then be trained using DaVinci,
3.
3, right? So
Yeah.
that's like GPT 3.5, using that to then essentially create a model that performs just as well as ChatGPT 3.5.
And you can run it on a VPS. You can run it on, power on a Surface Pro.
Yeah, yeah, a MacBook Air M2 chip, but you can probably, they're building one that's embedded in a browser. So imagine just having it available through your Chrome browser or an Edge browser.
Oh my god. This
And
is
that's
gonna,
localized. So
yes.
not even, requiring something like a Bing chat that sits in the browser but still cloud based and using Azure.
I
It's just
mean,
sitting there on your laptop.
you can you can, you can train it to do what else? You can pass it all of the medical literature. You can
Mm.
pass it the tax code. You
Mm.
can do, just, there's just so much stuff now.
Yeah, they're using that for tax. I mean, at work already, right? So they're just thinking every single possibility right now as your co-pilot. So they're calling this as your co-pilot. It's meant to be you're meant to be the main pilot, right? And the AI is meant to, be there to help you and, provide
Very
some
smart,
input.
very, very smart.
But guess what? You're training it the whole time. You're
Eh,
training your co-pilot to eventually be the main pilot.
You know what I love?
Yeah.
I love how, like, imagine if you were bringing out an AI,
Mm.
and that people say, okay, what is it? The regulatory people coming down and they said, what is it? What is the most harmless thing you could say? I think, instead of saying Skynet or whatever,
It's kind of
just say it's, like, I don't know, it's a machine that just predicts the next word in the sentence.
yeah. It's Clippy. It's a real
Yeah,
Clippy.
and then they'll be like, oh, okay, that's all it does. Let's
Yeah.
just get it out there. It's all
Harmless
right.
Clippy.
Because if you say it's like an artificial brain that
Mm.
is potentially sentient, they'll be like, okay,
Yeah.
hands up, let's
Or
go. off you go to jail. That's it.
Or turn the entire world and everything in the universe into paper clips. You know, like that's the whole super intelligence posture.
God.
But do you like imagine trying to regulate this, right? So they had the whole big tech, Senate inquiry process, and they had Mark Zuckerberg in the question box asking him, so how does
Oh
Facebook
yeah.
make money? And Mark was like, so we sell ads. Like that's the level of like education and sophistication you're dealing with lawmakers in terms of, when they're really just full-time politicians. They're just
Yeah,
dealing with the constituency.
there was some
And it's
epic fails.
until, the constituency is educated enough to actually ask what it is that they want regulated, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we had a few ideas, didn't we?
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
um, there was some stuff that I wrote down as well, just off the top of my head,
Mm.
and I sent it to you. I mean, I don't know. I just think that it really needs to catch up. This sort of thing needs to happen like before it starts to get serious. Because right now it's, as I think Sam Altman
Yeah.
said, now is a good time to get it out there while it's relatively harmless and get people to get used to it and know what to expect rather than to beef it up and get
Mm.
it to a stage where it's just panic mode.
Mm.
Um, I think that's the cat's out. I mean, if you're gonna get the cat out of the bag, you might as well
Yeah.
do it early.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then now we have time. Now we have to move forward. Now it's not just a hypothetical in the future thing.
Yeah.
It's like we got to figure out what to do because
The
it's now a
llama's
race
out
to
of
the
the
bottom.
bag. Yeah.
Yeah, the cat's out of the
The
bag.
llama's out of the bag. It's on a Lang chain. Imagine if, something like GPT-4 used, say, the Bitcoin blockchain as a hash reference for its memories. So you could have like infinite tokens. Like, this is the sort of stuff that LangChain is probably going to be building around. So, you can have interoperability around different models, but also infinite memory in how you sort of piece all that together. And if you put
Yes,
that onto the blockchain, say a Bitcoin blockchain or Ethereum, something that references to a distributed files,
I mean
distributed file
that
service.
is. I think that's maybe there'll be a problem with lag
Yeah.
with that. But
Maybe like
yes,
torrent.
you're right.
Maybe like torrent. Yeah. Peer to peer. Yeah.
I mean that, but memory and SSDs and
Mm.
NVMe's, they're so comparably cheap now.
Mm.
You get terabytes of it.
Filecoin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Filecoin, IPFS, all of that.
So, I mean, now I was even provisioning a server just the other day,
Mm.
and I could get 400 gigabytes of SSD, not
Mm.
NVMe,
Yeah.
SSD level, for $8 US a month.
Wow.
But that includes 4-core CPU
Wow.
and 8 gigabytes of RAM.
Jeez. Yeah, I mean, put that onto Google Colab, right? Like, that's pretty much just sorted.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Sam Altman was like, our backstop. Yes, that term's become popular since the whole world's melting down financially as well. But that there's a backstop for super intelligent AI if they see a risk, right? Because in the paper for GPT-4, like even though it wasn't very open, they did say, it was testing various things in which potentially the super intelligence might emerge, it might potentially escape. And, one of the examples was that it would try to get the help of a human to pass the I am not a robot button through, like, like a Mechanical Turk type of exercise. Right. But they were saying that if it did manage to find a way or try to start tricking people into giving it internet access and allowing it to make copies of itself on the internet and distribute itself in the world, in the open web, that there would be a failsafe or backstop, which
Yeah.
is to unplug everything. So a kill switch engineer.
Well, then, if it was that simple, why haven't we eradicated all the computer viruses out there?
exactly. And what was Skynet in Terminator 3? It
Uh,
was
it was a lady, wasn't it?
no,
I
it's
don't know.
not.
It was an artificial holographic lady.
No, no,
No?
that's the Terminator. But like Skynet itself was an AI, and it was actually initially a
Oh
program
wait,
used by the U.S. Defense
I'm getting
for
the
the
I'm
operating
getting
system of
yeah,
all its
sorry.
military hardware.
I was getting Resident Evil mixed up.
That's it. Yeah, Resident
Red
Evil.
Queen. Red Queen, sorry, yes. I mixed up my sci-fis.
All those contagion type movies, right? We were talking
Ah,
about The Last of Us last time, so it's like
see, I need to see that when I have time.
it's so
But
good.
I
But
have
yeah,
to
kill switch engineer. So The Last of Us, it's cordyceps, so it's instead of say some Resident Evil virus, it's actually fungus. The fungus that we eat mushrooms and things like that. The stuff that we try to get rid of, if you ever get a fungal infection, right? But
oh,
fungus don't survive in humans because of our body temperature, right? So in The Last of Us, in the sci-fi game, that the story behind that is that because of global warming, the fungus started to evolve and essentially, adapt to warmer temperatures, essentially be able to grow in humans. And what happened is actually in real life, some fungus actually can infect ants and turn them into zombie-like creatures.
yeah, well,
This
I
is there is something that we could bridge to AI in a sense, right? Because you know I'm paying for GPT-4 and I'm using it in everything I do except sensitive work-related subjects. But if it's learning from me and I'm relying on it, and it's sort of in a sense infected how I think, and we have this sort of symbiosis, um, you know, when will I start to follow the instructions of the AI as opposed to having any sort of real thoughts, right?
that is yeah, there's a lot of things to think about. I mean, I think that the the possibility of the AI actually wanting itself to like leave is very low.
Mm,
I think that it's more likely that bad actors, bad players out there, like
mm.
other
Yeah,
humans,
that's more likely.
that's going to be the linchpin. I mean,
Other nation states.
yes, China and Russia
Well,
and
yeah, Vladimir Putin, right?
Yugoslavia.
He was like, whoever controls or, you know,
Yeah,
gets some mercy over AI, can take over the world. And it's, and so, yeah, like you say, this arms race, Baidu, they launched
the
their
search engine,
LLM,
Chinese.
Bernie, right? It's better if you're using Chinese, of course, but they didn't make that open. They're not going
Of
to make
course
that open
not.
source.
But
Um,
Llama and Dalai and
yeah,
Alpaca,
Alpaca on Llama and Da Vinci, but yeah, not open AI,
and
closed
you've got the
AI.
weights now.
Mm.
Well, technically,
Well,
torrent.
I want to see, how all of this sort of landscape starts to change because still these large language models rely on, training it on a large data set, right? So they're trying to make those data sets smaller and smaller because they're increasing the relevancy. But
Accuracy
for
and efficiency.
real sort of, you know, emergent conscious sort of decision, evolution of, this theory of mind and how real intelligence comes about is that we don't have to train it on a large data set, right?
That's right, because like us,
Hmm.
like we are quite we have a very small general
Hmm.
understanding of the world, but then
Hmm.
we're very specialized in one area. Like someone will be a doctor, a dentist,
Hmm.
a woodworker, or whatever. So we so you could imagine an AI with a very basic, rudimentary understanding of the world, and then specialize in
Hmm.
neuroscience, making pizza, whatever it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that would be so much more manageable. And
Well,
maybe you
that's where the
do have
proprietary data will come in. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, if you say in radiology, they already do that with the actual health data of X-ray scans, you
mm,
know,
see, that might be
MRIs.
it might be the big backflip. It's like everyone's thinking, oh, we've got all these narrow AIs. Why don't we have a general AI?
Mm.
And then as we're approaching the general AI, we go, oh, you know what? We it's easier just to make some narrow
Well, I
AIs.
think if the general AI had access to all that data, it actually would get better because it would be able to do that transfer
Oh,
learning and
yes,
apply that. So take
yes,
one specialist field, which is why we don't have, we could have more innovation if more specialists collaborated,
yes.
right? because
That's
they're
very
in their
true.
silos. But yeah, I mean, the challenge is, like you say, like it's that sort of the deep knowledge that is privileged data, that's not open in the internet. So this is why the large language models haven't got to that level of expertise yet. But once the enterprises start using it, right, using their own instance on Azure, opening that up to their own private data sets they're hosting on a SQL database, well,
And they would use it because it's now for
yeah,
business. It's for
that's right.
making money,
Yeah,
and they will
Copilot
push
for
for it.
everything, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is one other point was, if you talked about, okay, so what's missing in this whole evolutionary step of developments in these large language models? Well, as humans, we do have something that's almost resembles like a large language model pre-trained, and it's there in our DNA, like those basic instincts, the reptilian brain we talked about last time,
Mm,
basic motor functions, and then the mammalian brain about, emotions and all of that sort of interactions in a societal, you know,
yes.
sort of the monkey brain equivalent. So all of that is actually pre-trained, right? That's baked into our DNA
Right.
because we
And
don't actually need to, experience that because we sort of feel like, as soon as we open ourselves up as babies, right? You see,
yes,
okay, you basically imprint on who's your mum, who's your dad,
yes.
or who's your both, right?
I,
It's like this is what's probably an element of LLM, but it's not all of it, right?
I got to say, as you were saying that just now,
Hmm.
and as you were talking about the personality and the instincts, I immediately thought of, a psychopath has down-regulated
Mm,
emotional centers.
yeah.
So, what would a large language model be if it didn't have any
Mm,
emotions?
yeah. Yeah.
Would it
Yeah.
be, I mean, a psychopath is, I saw that some scene of that movie, The Jackal, with Bruce Willis.
Jackal. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
an
that was
old one.
really nice.
Mm.
And there was a scene where he just kills in cold blood
Mm,
and doesn't even,
that's right.
not even a second thought. But that's because he's psychopathic and
Yeah,
all of his emotional
that's
centers are
right.
downregulated.
Something's missing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like he could do that without any second thought.
Yep.
And the thing is, if you have, I mean, we have to think about it. If an AI
Mm.
can think that way too, without
Yeah,
any emotional
that's right.
consequences,
That's pretty misaligned right there.
we have a very intelligent electronic psychopath potentially.
Yeah, that's right. And just, don't put it into like a dog with a gun on it, right? Those robot dogs with like the
Black Mirror.
Unitree ones with the machine guns they're actually shipping now into the military.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, this is not going to work.
the Atlas and the
Reactionary
Tesla
law.
bots.
We need to preemptively.
Mm.
We have to figure this out before the fact,
Yeah.
because you can't just make the car
Mm.
and have people smash into buildings and other cars, and
Mm.
1,000 deaths later go, oh, maybe we should, oh, seatbelts.
Yeah.
And then the car industry is like, no, no, we don't need
Mm.
that. Our cars are safe.
Well,
20 years later, they put it in.
yeah. Now this is exactly sort of where we need that alignment, right? So the co-pilot is meant to work alongside you and it's meant to sort of learn from your interactions. So in a sense, it sort of gets a sense of what you're trying to achieve, but it's missing the whole, social element. So what if the AI was starting to be trained, say, through augmented reality glasses, right? So it's doing eye tracking, it's looking at the things, so it's trying to estimate what you're thinking
Yes.
and it's overlaying that relevant information that you would otherwise have done yourself. And the more that you do those actions, it sort of, does that reinforcement learning with that human feedback into the better suggestions, recommendations it would do. Say, you're looking at your computer
Yes.
just for work and you start opening up an email and it starts suggesting the response. And as you type, you're pretty much validating it or you're just saying
You know what?
autocomplete,
I think that
right?
there might be some hesitation with that.
Mm.
'Cause I have a feeling a lot of people don't work that much.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. That's right. Say if they had to work, right?
Like they'd turn it on and then they would switch it off So I imagine it will be
Yeah,
on for
yeah,
about
yeah.
an hour a day.
Yeah. Say it was by Apple says, they say everything is done on device because, you can run those
Hmm.
alpacas on device,
Oh yeah.
right? So it's not even connected to the internet. And, say this is your personal digital agent. It's almost like your lawyer, your attorney, your, bodyguard, against the other sort of AIs out there that are trying to, you know, breach your data and all those sort of things. So it's like your protector. And because it's built up that relationship with you, you entrust it with
Yeah.
everything that you do. Your real co-pilot in life, right? So your partner in crime. And so as it gets better and trained like that, that's how you can probably align this particular AI to you. And should you
Right.
choose to, you can opt in to then, sync those learnings to a collective, to monetize that, right, in a private and
Yes.
secure way. And so this might be a way where, you were saying, how do we, make sure this transition for the human skills workforce
Mm.
to be as aligned and as sort of less shaky, right? Less violent as possible.
Yeah. Well, you want the income distribution
Mm.
to be relatively unaffected,
Yeah.
at least in the beginning,
Yeah.
and you want the cooperation of the people.
Mm. This is how you're going to be able to fund a UBI, right? So OpenAI's mission is to fund a UBI, but that takes monetization of what they've got, which is the closed AI. And so, in order to do that, you should be rewarded,
Yes.
for all that training you've done for your
Yes.
AIs,
And
right?
the UBI is kind of, it has a very what do you call it? It's like that. It's. I know it's anti-capitalist in a sense that it's you don't want give people handouts, and a lot of people don't like free handouts. But I mean, it is one way to solve it.
Mm,
But then, how do you keep people going to work
mm,
and keeping their professions up?
yeah. Well, this is what Andrew, Andrew Yang, right? Back in the Yang
Yeah,
Gang days, he's
yeah.
back. He's running with his Forward Party for the 2024 presidential election.
I don't know why I know he gave up because he had to back. Was it Bernie?
Yeah, I mean, he had to
Ah,
back Biden, right? In the
and
end.
then Bernie just anyway.
Oh, he was a fan of Bernie, but I think yeah, he ended up just backing Biden because that was sort of
Mm.
the most likely winner of the race for on the Democrat side. But he lost momentum because I think we just didn't really realize what was going to happen to us. Like if he ran today on the ticket of automation, AI and automation, right, he would get a lot more traction, which is
Mm.
happening right now with Bill Maher on the TV show just this past weekend. And,
Yeah.
I think during COVID when he ran, right, he could have just been running on the fact that we could be giving stimulus checks at the time, right? And that's in a
Yeah.
form almost like a UBI. And people would understand what that means because everyone gets it, right? It's
Yes.
everyone gets a stimmy check rather than only those that are seeking work and are, unemployed that get
Yes.
it. And it takes away that stigma because we're all in this together.
Actually, that brings up a good point.
Mm,
So it's like I mean, with AI, we have the. It seems like we are going to have the opportunity to have our cake and eat it too.
mm,
So we have so much potential economic output
mm,
compared to the population. And
mm,
as that economic output grows, you could have the UBI
mm,
for people that just don't care about work. And then, but for all those people who are incentivized to
mm.
they just want to get out there and work, they can do that.
Yeah,
And
it's a
there'll
choice.
be options.
That's right. There'd be options. Like you could choose to continue to do what you were doing, right?
Yeah.
Even though an AI is doing it already, it doesn't stop you from doing it. It's just like,
Yeah.
painting artwork. Just because you can put into Mid-Journey or Stable Diffusion or DALL-E 2 to do it for you, it doesn't stop you from actually painting it, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like riding horses now these days. They do it as a hobby as opposed to a necessity. And,
Right.
this is basically what people really need to come to mind because it's kind of like the Star Trek scenario where in a future where we are abundant in all of the resources and all of the things that we could humanly want. And, what's there more to do, right? So they had this episode where there was a rich guy, who had been, cryopreserved and, woken in the future
Mm-hmm.
when Star Trek, everyone had eliminated scarcity. So it's a post-scarcity society. And he's like, I'm a big shot lawyer from a law firm, and I know that I still have a lot of money and I'll continue to use my power over you. And people are like, what why are you doing this, right? And then after a while and getting to understand how society's evolved now to a post-scarcity world, he's like, well, what do I do to actually spend the time, right? And he was told that you're meant to just enrich yourself, right? Enrich yourself and really basically do what makes you feel good. Like this is the ultimate human, the final human form, right? It's like for us to be free from the need to couple work from income. So that decoupling where AI can provide all the goods and services that we could humanly need, before we merge with it and upload our brain and, basically beam ourselves all throughout the universe. That's when that's what it's meant to be all about.
Being blind. Yeah, this is. See, I sometimes think these thoughts, and sometimes talking to you, sometimes talking to Anuraj, Jonathan, and I get that moment of, wait a minute, it's just getting too crazy, and I developed this habit of snapping myself out and go, come back.
Yeah, back to reality. There goes gravity. Yeah, that's right.
It does go gravity. Like we go. So it's like, I would wonder as a kid, when you look up at the universe, why is all that stuff out there? Even if say you were, say, religious, and you would say, why did God put all this stuff up there? And now it's kind of like, oh yeah, okay.
I can actually explore it.
Yeah. It's actually there for us to go and check out.
And yeah, I mean, it really sort of, so ever since how we've been raised, right, is that we've almost chosen money to be a religion, because we've believed in that fact that money is, of course, with the means of getting the resources, the goods and services that you've ever wanted, right? And so the entire life goals have been aligned towards money. And, I guess some people worship it. If you think about Wall Street and capitalism, right? They do the ceremonies of ringing that bell, of doing an IPO is like going to heaven, of, like basically,
with a spec
have
company.
these charts that they read, kind of like, doing all the superstitious things. Oh, if it goes up 8 times, it might go down. And if it goes up again, then you're in a bull run. And like, there's all this sort of like religious ceremony about it. And right now we're in the midst of so many things happening that's disrupting our entire view of the world and the universe and the multiverse, right? Because one, we're seeing what's happening in the US financial markets right now, that people are starting to question whether the US dollar is the real God that they actually should have been believing in this whole time. Well, because what's been happening?
80 trillion just...
Yeah.
Was it 80 trillion?
Something like 40 trillion.
40 trillion.
Oh, $40 trillion of bonds. So let's just get everyone up to speed on what's been happening, right? So people heard about the crypto markets, right? Because they thought crypto was a scam, with FTX imploding. We talked about this in our last pod a couple of times ago. And they said, okay, so if crypto's a scam, then, we should just put our money back into the US dollar, because tech, that's had its run. Now that the interest rates are rising, the future value, the present value of money, right, is worth more right now, right? I want my returns right now than into the future.
Well, when that stuff goes up, I tend to look at commodities, gold, etc.
Yeah.
Is that what you... Yeah.
Well, so yes, I mean, so they went back to their banks. They went back to fiat money, because they realized that they thought that, okay, that's what was real for them.
Yeah.
But little did they realize that if they studied cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, right, and the whole reason why Bitcoin came about after the last global financial crisis, the last GFC, right, in 2008, which is why Bitcoin was invented in the first place, was that we could no longer trust the banking system, the US fractional reserve, as soon as they decoupled
From
from gold from the Bretton Woods system, and as soon as they realized that the US dollar might not be the reserve currency going forward, which after World War One and towards World War Two was when the US really established themselves as that reserve currency. So they can't just print more of it, and
They do.
and make it okay. But they are printing more of
yeah.
it, right? Because what's happened recently, so you had, Silvergate collapse, which is a crypto bank.
Silicon Valley, right?
Silicon Valley Bank was the next to fall. And people thought, oh, this is a crypto and tech issue, right? Let's blame it on the crypto and tech bros. But it turns out that Silicon Valley Bank went down because it had invested into these 10-year long-term treasury bonds, these mortgage-backed securities, right?
When were they going to mature?
10 years, exactly.
In 10 years.
In 10 years' time.
Right.
So during COVID, interest rates were zero because that was a stimulus that the government wanted to make sure the economy, when it was shut down, could still continue to function and grow.
Yes.
Right. And that's when you had all this sort of
you had to
pumps in the crypto and tech. But now that they've realized that the inflation is catching on, right? All of that money had to go somewhere when the doors opened, and it was inflating the economy. They went from 0% interest rates to 5% in the US. But guess what? Those 10-year mortgage bonds that were bought by all the banks during COVID, right, thinking that that was the best return that they could get, pretty much free money, right? It's risk-free, 1.5% max versus 0%, better than nothing, right? And Silicon Valley Bank, because they were growing so fast, because they were working with a lot of startups, they got those startups to put their deposits, the funding that they had raised, back into the banks. And, they had a great relationship there. They also lent out to startups as well. So they were pretty much a Ponzi in a sense. But I guess that's the US fiat reserve currency anyway, right? At the end of the day, because of that huge jump in interest rates, these banks, these regional banks, right? So they're not like the too big to fail banks. These regional banks couldn't liquidate those 10-year treasury bonds in time to essentially meet the needs of their depositors. Now, as soon as the depositors, like the startups, like Peter Thiel, from, basically all the sort of VCs, as soon as they realized that Silicon Valley Bank was in trouble because of these treasuries, right?
They want out.
They were like, get your money out, because there's nothing really for them to lose.
So they couldn't manage the run.
Exactly. Well, and there was no downside for taking your money out and putting into another bank, right?
Yeah,
so you might as well just do that.
It was just a paper. Well, the thing with that also seems to be happening to Afterpay and ZipPay. So they really went got huge evaluations during COVID, 0%, well, close to 0% interest rate.
Yeah.
And good business model, pay something over 3 months. But then now that the interest rates are going up, so what do they someone buys something on eBay for say $600, it splits it into 3 payments of $200. But in the meantime, they have to pay the person who just sold it.
Yeah.
So they borrow, which used to be fine because it was very low interest rate, but now their margin is nothing.
Yeah. That's right. So, I think being in crypto also teaches you a lot about how money works, right? Because, for say, cryptocurrency, you learn about what's the max supply, right? Bitcoin, it's 21 million. There's never going to be ever more than 21 million Bitcoins. Whereas with fiat currency, right, they could continue to print that. Yeah. They have a monetary policy that is so delayed, right? So in terms of moving interest rates up or down, as determined by the Federal Reserve and the respective reserve banks across all the other jurisdictions, they have to wait for the data to come in, right? They assess that in their monthly meeting, and then they move up the gear in these sort of incremental steps, right? 25 basis points, 50 basis points, 75 basis points, if they really wanted to do a U-turn on the economy.
It's like the RBA.
It was like the RBA, right? It really rug pulled us on that one, saying with the forward guidance as well that we won't raise rates for another year or so, 2 years. And so,
but then they had to because
because of inflation. It really caught up to them. They thought it was transitory. It wasn't transitory. There was a lot of money flooding into the market. So Silicon Valley Bank, they, just like the other regional banks, they relied on the forward guidance by the Federal Reserve that the interest rate would stay low.
Yep.
They bought those treasury bonds that were sold by the Reserve as part of that stimulus, right? The quantitative easing that was happening.
Quantitative easing, yes.
And then rates went up 5%. So all those bonds that they bought are, basically worth 10% less, right? Relatively speaking, 8 to 10% less. And these are unrealized losses, and they don't need to be put as unrealized losses on the balance sheet because they could just hold them to maturity. So regional banks don't need to basically mark to market these instruments. And so, if there was a secondary market, like say securitized version of these bonds, then maybe you could just pass that risk down to the public markets, right, as an ETF or something like that.
This is kind of what happened to FTX. There was like a whistle, and they said, "Oh, this is not."
Yeah, FTX is different. Yeah, it's because FTX isn't a bank. They should have held everything one for one. Right?
Yes, but the reason why everyone just started pulling out was because there was no confidence.
Yeah, CZ was like, CZ "Hang on a second, something smells fishy." Why?
Which is basically the same as with the banks, with their bonds and the confidence.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what made Silicon Valley Bank fishy was that it wanted to raise $2 billion to cover their shortfalls on their balance sheet. They thought that, they wouldn't be able to cover their assets and liabilities because some of their liabilities have been written down. And also because of rising interest rates, they weren't making as much money as they should be on those instruments. Right? And so they needed to liquidate some of their treasury bonds and make a loss, a $1.8 billion loss on selling those treasury bonds. And they had to raise $2 billion to fill in that hole. And as soon as Silicon Valley realized, all the VCs realized that this bank is making a loss on treasury bonds, why do they need to sell money? They must be low in cash to serve the depositors.
So they shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, that's the lack of confidence. And then everyone withdrew, and think about, initially it was $42 billion withdrawn within a single day. And by the end of it, I think it was about, the majority of the customer deposits were withdrawn. And, now it's sort of handed over to the FDIC, which is the, insurance for these regional banks. And so if you had deposits more than $250,000, you were no longer insured. So that's why everyone was freaking out. So that was driving, driving the government. Everyone was trying to push the government to ensure that the depositors were safe. Because, sure, the shareholders of Silicon Valley Bank could be wiped out. The bondholders, the corporate bondholders could be wiped out as well. That's we don't want to bail them out because of their financial mismanagement of locking these long-term treasury bonds in, with these customer deposits. But instead, the deposits got backstopped. So the Federal Reserve set up a facility where not just Silicon Valley Bank, but also First National as well, another regional bank, could also tap into this reserve. But now they've realized that this is not just, a couple of regional bank issue. It's all the banks. It's a systemic issue with all the banks between now and the next 3 months will have this liquidity crunch where they'll be forced to sell these bonds, making a loss on them in order to meet customer deposits if there was another bank run or if there was another sort of systemic risk driving people to move their money elsewhere.
So would the Federal Reserve be now thinking of how to create some liquidity for these people?
That's right. So that's exactly what they did earlier today. And so
that's a good idea.
And they're like, okay, well, we'll put in 25 billion, right?
That's not enough.
Guess how much they think it's going to be withdrawn at this stage?
They need to put 500 billion.
Yeah, it's probably, it's shooting up So it's coming up to about maybe a couple of trillion.
Oh,
And that's pretty much reversing all of that sort of effort that they've been doing to increase interest rates to reverse the quantitative easing they've been doing since COVID. So $4 trillion was pretty much printed out during, from the COVID
and
stages.
that's going to push interest rates
And they
up
got rid
even
of
more,
some of it,
inflation
and
up
then now
even
it's
more.
like back up again.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's no longer just a US Federal Reserve issue anymore because Credit Suisse, right? They've been in trouble since, last decade. They've been going down in terms of the shareholder value. But because of all this treasury bond issue, potentially losing their value and people losing faith in these banks, they've also had to be backstopped. And the Swiss government actually, had to backstop all the depositors. And then they've been essentially shotgun wedding to the other Swiss bank, UBS, in this recent announcement this morning that, UBS is going to acquire Credit Suisse for 3 billion francs, or 3 billion euros.
Nothing.
Yeah, it was worth 70 billion euros in 2006. Credit Suisse, right? It's such a home.
Oh my gosh.
It's like a, you know it, right? Everyone that you
They're
say
buying
Credit
the
Suisse.
debt.
Yeah.
They're basically buying the debt.
Pretty much. Well, as part of the negotiations, they're saying, we want to make sure that we're not on the hook for any of this toxic debt that might be held by Credit Suisse. All these 10-year treasury mortgage-backed securities. We don't want to have to bear any costs to that. And guess what? So now it's a global issue because they've got Switzerland involved, but also all the other foreign banks, right? Their foreign reserve banks have just gathered, right? So Joe Biden, you've got Canada, all parts of Europe, UK, right? Japan, all the Federal Reserve have come together and they've established this credit swap facility. Because guess what? All those foreign banks are also holding US long-term treasuries. So these unrealized losses that we thought was just a US regional bank issue is not only just also applies to the large US banks, but also across the other foreign banks. And what this is trying to stop essentially is the foreign banks dumping the US Treasury bonds and making a loss and flooding the market, right? Because then that'll devalue it even more.
There'll be too
And
much
so they're trying to
supply.
facilitate a liquidity pool, right? In a crypto sense, this would be a liquidity pool where people can swap their treasury bonds for people that want to buy it within that. So they're creating a market for it.
They're creating an isolated swap space that's out of sight of the regular economy.
That's right. It's an OTC deals to swap it out.
Oh yeah, like an OTC on in crypto.
Yeah, reserve to reserve, Federal Reserve
But the
to Federal
OTCs need
Reserve.
to be announced.
That's right. And that way it doesn't impact the market price when you sell it all out. But get this. If someone is forcing the swap of the US Treasury bonds and it's the US that has to pay and they don't have the cash to pay, they're just going to print that. Because they're the reserve currency of the world and the US bonds are denominated in US dollars, right? And so this will cause even more inflation because it's reversing all that sort of monetary tightening they've been trying to do since this inflation ever started. And so between now and the next 3 months is probably the shakiest part when these short-term treasuries are coming to due.
So what's going to happen to all the other countries holding US dollars? Are they going to go overweight or are they going to get rid of it? Because they're holding on to something that's inflating.
Yeah. Well, guess what? There's a huge game theory going on right now. So if you choose to sell, right, what are you going to sell? What are you going to get? You're going to get more US dollars.
Or commodities.
So then you have to swap the US dollars to commodities, right? So you'll flood the market with the US dollars and that'll cause a sort of landslide in the value of the US dollars.
It's going down anyway.
Right. So if you understand cryptocurrency, you know exactly what I'm talking about because this is how liquidity works, right?
Global rug
how markets work, market making works. And so there's a game theory going on because you basically, if you sell, you're saying that you no longer have faith in the US dollar and the US as, the reserve currency of the world, and
Mm.
also its dominance in the global economy. So
Yep.
what are you going to go back to? What are you going to go to? Are you going to go to China and the digital yuan, right? So if you're a BRICS country, right? So Brazil, Russia, right?
Bring the
India,
Amaro, whatever it's called.
China, and South Africa. AMRO, yeah. Bring up AMRO.
What's the one that was going to be China, Canada, Australia, and the US?
Oh, you mean UK?
Oh, AUKUS.
AUKUS?
AUKUS.
Yeah,
There we
that's a
go.
defense pack. Yeah, that's a
Oh wait,
military pack.
so that
Yeah,
was a
but also
defense
that's
pack. Yeah.
that's one of the things that the US is trying to make the deficit lower, right? Because we're going to be spending
Oh,
$370
God.
billion US Australian into these submarines, right? So that'll help their balance sheet, the US side, over 10 years. But what I'm saying is that strategically, it means all those sort of countries that are aligning with the US, right? Because this is what it is. This gathering of this
Mm.
credit swap facility is the US aligned nations. And because you don't see many BRICS in there, right? So they're basically trying to backstop the US economy and maintaining it as the reserve currency and its dominance in the economy. But if all this fails, this is the new world order we're going to be facing. This is exactly what Ray Dalio and the principles he's been preaching, and what Balaji has been very active in talking about on Twitter, which is the network state. So he's been on about this all this time, that when the US dollar implodes, it's Bitcoin, and it's going to be the hyper Bitcoinization, right? Stage where Bitcoin could go to $1 million, because Bitcoin to US dollar, right, could be infinitely high. But Bitcoin to Bitcoin will always be one Bitcoin, because there's only going to be 21 Bitcoins relative to all the stuff we have in the world. Yeah. So I think, yeah, over the next 3 months, I think we can probably document it and see what plays out, but it definitely won't be boring.
gotta gotta check my crypto wallet now. Cheap.
Yeah. I mean, this is the reason why Bitcoin was invented from the last GFC, when we
Ethereum.
lost faith in the financial system
Mm.
of fiat.
Fear of fiat.
Fear of fiat. And also why transhuman coin exists for transhumanists, right? Because we want to have a community of people, which is, this whole network state philosophy of people, places, and laws. People, land, or laws, and laws. So places and land, right? So we need to be able to acquire land of which we can operate, and
See, this is what
laws in terms of smart contracts.
we'll have the AI workers doing all the essential stuff, and we will just be buying and selling Bitcoin and land.
Well, Singularity Net, right? We talked about this last time. Singularity Net is AI on chain, and Singularity DAO has already got a Dynaset that algorithmically trades cryptocurrencies. So it could, essentially be the liquidity provider, but also the profit maker in these markets across every resource, across every currency, good or service. It's an ultimate arbitrager. And I don't think humans will be able to beat that AI. I mean, quants already beat them, humans, in proprietary trading.
If AI got access to the stock market right now and was able to buy and sell stocks,
Yeah.
it'll eventually end up with all the money.
Yep. Yeah, it's like that movie, Limitless, right? Just like a superhuman. He's not even AI. He's just like super jacked in the brain. And
Oh, I don't. So what happened there?
yeah, so, in Limitless, regular guy, down on his luck, discovers this
Oh, right.
drug,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That makes his eyes bluer.
Yes, and he knows how to make money on the stock market.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
pretty much. Yeah. So that'll be, AI times, and then times that by, infinity, because just keep on replicating and copying. Eventually, will just trade itself just for fun, because everybody else is broke from trading.
Yeah, it'll become monopoly.
Yeah, it'll literally, no monocles. Apparently, I always thought Monopoly Man had monocles, but I saw a meme about.
He had glasses.
Yeah, apparently he never had. Yeah, that's some Inception stuff right there.